Let's talk about Singapore. This is the story of a nation that really, by all accounts, shouldn't even exist. I mean, we're talking about a tiny island that was kicked out on its own, with zero resources and a population at odds with itself. And yet, today, it's one of the most successful countries on the entire planet. So how on earth did that happen? Well, we're about to find out. When you picture Singapore now, this is probably what comes to mind. A glittering, almost futuristic metropolis. It's a global hub for finance, for trade, a place so incredibly prosperous, it almost seems unreal. But this perfect postcard image, it hides a history that was anything but a sure thing. And that brings up a really fascinating question. How did a small island with no natural resources to speak of, a divided population, and surrounded by not-so-friendly neighbors transform itself into a global powerhouse? It's honestly one of the greatest, most unlikely stories of the 20th century. And just to put its success into perspective, get this. Singapore ranks 7th in the entire world for wealth per person. That's ahead of most of the traditional economic giants we think of. This wasn't just some minor success story. This was an absolutely meteoric rise. So let's rewind the clock a bit, because to really get the miracle of modern Singapore, you have to understand just how improbable its very existence was. This is the story of a truly unlikely metropolis. It all starts with one brilliant and kind of radical idea. See, before it was a nation, Singapore was really just a concept, a port with no rules, designed specifically to break a monopoly. Now, the island itself had a pretty long history, with legends of princes and lions and a bustling medieval port called Temasek. But then, in 1613, it was destroyed and pretty much forgotten. For the next 200 years, it was basically just a jungle, while the Dutch built up this powerful monopoly over all the trade in the region. And right there, that was a huge problem for the British Empire. Their super important trade route between India and China was getting choked off. They were being hit with high taxes and all sorts of restrictions at Dutch ports. They needed a workaround, and they needed one fast. And this is the guy who had the idea, Sir Stamford Raffles. He was a British administrator who looked at this island and saw a massive opportunity, where everyone else just saw swamp and jungle. He came up with a way to challenge the Dutch, not with military force, but with pure economics. His idea was simple, but at the time, totally revolutionary. A free port. I mean, what if you just created a port with no taxes, no duties, no restrictions at all? Traders could just come and go as they pleased, completely bypassing the whole Dutch system. It was the ultimate economic disruptor. And oh, did it work? Just look at this growth in trade. It went from basically nothing in 1819 to over $22 million just 5 years later. That's not growth, that's an explosion. Traders absolutely flocked to the island. The power of this one idea is just so clear. In only 5 years, this brand new upstart settlement blew past the trade volume of the long-established British port of Penang. Raffles' big gamble had paid off, big time, and the foundation for modern Singapore was officially laid. But the story is far from over. That thriving colonial port would soon face two just catastrophic events that would nearly wipe it off the map. And in the process, these events would forge a completely new national identity. Okay, so fast forward to World War II. The British had poured a ton of money into turning Singapore into this massive naval base. Winston Churchill himself called it the Gibraltar of the East. It was seen as this impregnable fortress, something that would scare off any Japanese aggression. Well, that confidence was completely shattered on February 15th, 1942. The Japanese didn't attack from the sea, where all the big guns were pointed. Nope, they came down through the jungle from the north. The impregnable fortress fell in just over a week. It was the largest surrender in all of British military history, and it just destroyed the myth of colonial superiority forever. So after the war, Singapore faced a whole new crisis. The thinking was that its future lay with its much larger neighbor, so it merged with the new Federation of Malaysia in 1963. But this political marriage, well, it was doomed from the start. It was just plagued by these deep-seated political and racial conflicts. After just 2 years of turmoil and riots, Singapore was literally kicked out of Malaysia. This quote from its founding prime minister, Kuan Yew, you can just feel the heartbreak. On August 9th, 1965, Singapore suddenly found itself an independent country, totally against its will, which led to this absolutely terrifying question. I mean, think about it. You're completely on your own, a tiny island with no army, no natural resources, and deep divisions inside your own country. How do you possibly survive that? And this is where the story pivots from tragedy to absolute triumph. Facing what looked like certain extinction, Singapore's leaders didn't just sit around hoping for a miracle. They went out and engineered one. The scale of the problems they faced in 1965 was just immense. You had mass unemployment, which was a ticking time bomb for civil unrest. There was a severe housing crisis. People were living in slums. The nation had no natural resources, not even enough water, and it faced the very real threat of being invaded. The odds were stacked impossibly high. So, what did they do? They came up with this incredibly pragmatic, almost ruthless blueprint for survival. Step 1. Industrialize fast. Attract foreign companies with tax breaks to create jobs. Step 2. House the people. Launch a massive public building program. Step 3. Build a defense force from scratch as the British were leaving. And Step 4. Educate the population to create a skilled English-speaking workforce for all those new industries. This right here is Step 1 in action. They literally carved industrial estates like this one at Jurong out of swampland. They were building the physical foundation for a modern manufacturing economy from nothing. And the results of the housing plan were just as dramatic. In just 10 years, they moved the majority of their population out of unsafe, unsanitary slums and into modern high-rise apartments. It was a social transformation on a scale you rarely, if ever, see. And really, this comparison says it all. You go from a colonial outpost to a hyper-modern city-state in just a few decades. The change is, well, it's staggering. And it wasn't luck. It was the result of a deliberate, focused, and absolutely relentless national effort. And that leaves us with his final thought. Singapore's story really forces you to ask, what does it take for a nation to turn its biggest weaknesses into its biggest strengths? Its lack of resources forced it to innovate. Its vulnerability forced it to become resilient. And its tiny size forced it to be smarter and faster than pretty much everyone else. It's a powerful lesson. From an impossible nation